The early preaching of the apostles in the book of Acts has a rather consistent refrain. The Roman and Jewish authorities, the powers that ruled the world in Palestine, crucified Jesus, but God raised him from the dead. They condemned him, but God vindicated him. They rejected him, but God chose him as the chief cornerstone of God's new temple. In Jesus, God sided with the innocent, the oppressed, and the persecuted. God justified Jesus in the flesh through his resurrection. According to the Apostle Paul, Jesus was delivered over to death for our offenses and was raised for our justification, so that we might be saved by his life. But first, it was the justification of Jesus himself. When God raised Jesus from the dead, the judgment of death or curse was reversed, and the just, innocent one was vindicated. This is the mystery of godliness. Death did not win. The resurrection of Jesus destroys death, and his resurrection became our resurrection. When Jesus was raised from the dead, it was a pledge of our own resurrection. We were, in effect, raised with Jesus. This is a significant event in the life of Jesus and in our lives, because his resurrection is our resurrection. First, our resurrection with Jesus is the presence of God's transforming Spirit. The life we now live is not our own. It is the resurrected life of Jesus. We live in the power of the life-giving Spirit who has given us new life in Christ. The presence of the Spirit is God's gift by which God transforms us into the image of Christ. Thus, the present experience of the transforming power of the Spirit bears fruit in us and is a foretaste of our full redemption by the power of the Spirit in the future resurrection. Second, our resurrection with Jesus also transforms our experience of death. Since God has defeated death, we no longer fear its hostile grip. Consequently, our experience of death is transformed from hopelessness, fear, and despair into hope, expectation, and anticipation. Though we no longer fear death, we hate it as it defaces God's good creation. Third, our resurrection with Jesus in our spiritual bodies enables full communion with God in the new heaven and new earth. Since God has raised Jesus with a spiritual body, we yearn for our spiritual bodies when we will experience the fullness of God's Spirit in the new heaven and new earth. Indeed, the indwelling Spirit is our promise that we will be raised, and the power of the Spirit that now works in us to transform us into divine glory will transform our broken bodies into the glorious body of Jesus Christ. Our present mortal, weak, and broken bodies will be transformed into immortal, powerful, and glorious bodies. We will have bodies energized and empowered by the full transforming presence of the Spirit of God. The resurrection is God's pledge to perfect the world in new creation. God acted decisively to reverse the effects of Good Friday. The resurrection is God's pledge to birth a new heaven and a new earth and liberate the cosmos from its bondage. The resurrection is new creation.